Hello friends, look at this. I'm standing here in front of this huge patch of common milkweed. What a delicious meal we're gonna have, huh Becca?
You shouldn't mislead people.
Mislead people? What do you mean? Looks great.
What if somebody only watches the first 2 seconds of your video?
That happens sometimes, doesn't it? Today we're actually going to learn about how to distinguish common dogbane from common milkweed. Hi friends, my name is Kenton Whitman, and together with my family we aim to share wilderness skills, mindfulness practices, wild edible plants, family adventures, and skills that break you free from the limits of civilized life. Join us by subscribing to our channel and joining our YouTube family. Note that these indicators are for trying to identify these when they are young shoots. As they mature, especially with the milkweed, the parts that you are harvesting are so distinct. The flower buds and those beautiful pods, that you're not going to be mistaking them for dogbane. But if you are interested in harvesting the shoots as a wild edible, this will help you to make that distinction. All right, as with many things, there's a story here. And the story has to do with being conscious about what we put out into the world. So many of us maybe have your own YouTube channel, you're writing books, writing a blog, or otherwise putting things out onto the internet or out in writing. And sometimes something we put out there becomes a part of the world consciousness. This is maybe what happened in the case of milkweed. So most of you have probably heard of Samuel Thayer, a renowned expert on wild edibles he's introduced innumerable people to foraging, and he brought a new level of expertise to it for most of us because he was eating the food. And this is very different than when we just repeat information that we've heard. So that's what I was talking about when we're being careful about what we put out into the world. It's very easy to just hear something and then repeat it in, say, a video without making it a part of our daily existence and really testing and trying things out for ourselves. And I think, all of us are probably guilty of that, simply because there's so much information today that comes into our minds through all of the media that we intake. And we only have, so much life experience. So the information coming in overwhelms that experience, and all of us are going to do that at some point. But if we can do our best to speak from a place of knowledge, things are going to be very different. And that's what Sam was doing when he experimented with milkweed. If you have read about milkweed in any older books besides Sam's, and now it's all over the internet, what he shared with the world, but any of those older books would have talked about milkweed and said that it is toxic, that it contains some cardiac glycosides in the milk, and that it is exceedingly bitter. And the only way we can add it to our diet is by boiling it in multiple changes of water. This story has been told and retold in all sorts of edible plant guides. Even interestingly, we have in Tom Brown Jr.'s Edible Plants Guide, we have grandfather reportedly telling him this same story about milkweed. Now, let's understand a couple things here. One is that there are many, many species of milkweed. The common milkweed is just one species. Like the name common says, it's probably the most common species that we'll find. And it is super delicious. There are many parts of this that we can eat, from the shoot to the pods with their magical white creamy whatever it is inside that is really hard to describe, and the flower buds. The girls like this, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like it's a really yummy one.
Butter and salt.
Butter and salt.
What doesn't taste good with butter and salt?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. There is concern about monarchs for some people when harvesting the common milkweed. And that's very understandable. It's been pointed out by numerous people that in general we eat different parts. The caterpillar of the monarch butterfly is after the leaves, and often we're eating the pods. But what really needs to be pointed out here is that when we start thinking of something as a food, we humans tend to start planting it more. So if you think about what if we all started eating milkweed over some other, say, soybeans. Soybeans, that kind of industrial agriculture just destroys so much land. Certainly no milkweed can grow there. So definitely not good for the monarchs when we're eating soybeans. When we're eating these beautiful milkweeds, then we are probably, as our girls do every fall, sending those seeds far and wide, planting those seeds, establishing more and more of these plants, and actually creating more habitat for the butterflies. So just an alternate way of thinking of it. Today we're not going to go into how to prepare the milkweed. We're just going to learn how to identify it from the dogbane. So Sam Thayer is the one that traces back probably to Ewell Gibbons, who was out and saw this plant and thought it was milkweed, and sure kind of looks like milkweed. The problem is when he tasted it, which I'll do in a moment for you, he tasted something that was extremely bitter. But we want to be able to tell this from the common milkweed without error, and it's pretty easy to do. There's a couple distinguishing characteristics, and we're going to make it simple and just concentrate on a few. Probably one of the easiest ones is to turn over this leaf and take a look at it. Does it have fine hairs? You can fool yourself a little bit because these guys are kind of, you're seeing that almost white powdery bloom appearance. There's not actually a bloom on here, but it has that appearance, and that can seem a little fur-like or hair-like. But let's take a look at the milkweed. We're going to see something quite different. Here's the bottom of the milkweed. You can see those distinctive little furry bottoms. And it feels furry. Really soft. Next, let's look at the stem. See the red, kind of purple coloration moving up through it? Sometimes we're going to have these little dots. That is going to look really different from our milkweed stem, which here the stem is just green. You're not seeing any of that reddish tinge. Do note that milkweed towards the bottom can have a reddish tinge. There's a young one that's almost all red. Here I've got a dogbane, and we're not really seeing a lot. There's a little teeny bit of that in there. So the stem coloration, in my experience, is just an indicator. I'm not going to depend on that one because although in general, you're going to find the dogbane is super reddy tingy and the milkweed is that pure green, there's enough variation in there that that's just an indicator. We're relying on the others to bolster up that indication that we get from looking at the stem coloration. Now the other thing we're going to note is a little bit of a bloom. So we can recognize this on some other plants. We've seen this on hemlocks. Just a little bit of basically a powder there that can be wiped away to reveal a shiny stem underneath. That bloom is present on the dogbanes. But on the milkweed, no bloom, doesn't change color when I rub my finger along it. This bloom is a really, really strong indicator. I cannot say that I have ever seen it on milkweed. Environmental factors could create a situation where you would not see it on the Dogbane. For instance, somebody else coming up and rubbing it off. But on the milkweed, I've never seen that bloom. Finally, we can look at the stem itself, and this Dogbane has a very rounded stem. When I rub my fingers around it, I'm not going to feel any edges. And this is going to contrast with the milkweed, which is more difficult to distinguish, but definitely there once you start to get a feel for it. When you rub your fingers around it, this has a squarish stem. It is not square like a mint that has those nice sharp edges, but it is rounded square. But definitely going to feel different when it is rolled in your fingers. You're going to feel those flat edges rather than perfectly round. The roundness or the squareness of the stem is going to be much more pronounced when you cut the stem. So if you are harvesting, you're going to be cutting it anyway. Take a look at that from cross section. You'll be able to tell it much more easily. The final pretty easy way to tell is by last year's stalks. So these guys have a great cordage in them, very distinctive, no pods at all. And if we see last year's milkweed, they're going to look quite different. And the final part is the taste test. So here is where I've been parroting information that I heard before, because I've never actually had a good bite of the Dogbane to taste how bitter it is. So I've just been saying it's bitter without trying it out. So here I'm going to give it a shot.
Not too bad, huh?
Here's the white juice. Zero. There's nothing better about this at all. You want to taste it?
Sure. Yeah. Tastes like lettuce.
Tastes like lettuce.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do we do with that information? This has zero bitter flavor at all. I'm going to try a different one. Wait for it. Wait for it. Kind of sweet.
Is that just because they're young? Or is this some other species?
So now I'm going to say this is Dogbane. In my experiments, 2 leaves from one patch. It has no bitterness. That is not a distinguishing characteristic at all. I wanted to try some more. Which now begs the question of, if people were trying this in saying it was overly bitter, what were they experiencing? Here's a milkweed leaf. Which has a totally different texture. It's equally not bitter. It does taste better though. Yum.
Maybe later in the year it's bitter.
Maybe later in the year it's bitter, you were saying?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe later in the year it's bitter? Maybe the bitter comes on after a while here. Yeah. Very interesting. So, this is going to shift. You know, interesting that I started out the video with that thought about this is going to shift from an educational video to a question video. Have you tried the Dogbane? Is it bitter to you? Is it bitter just to some people and not others? All kinds of questions now come up. So there's a deeper lesson here. I'm going to kind of feel out what that is over time, but share your thoughts on it. Definitely an interesting experience for me, and love to hear what you have to say about it down in the comments. I will still hold that the ID for the milkweed should guide you to the common milkweed and away from this. Is this toxic? Could we be eating this too? I don't know. That's all questions that are beyond my capacity to answer right now. All right, love to you all, and we will talk with you in the comments. I'm excited to hear what you have to say. Okay, a couple of possibilities have come to mind. Joel Gibbons tried a different species of milkweed and mistook that for common milkweed. And that species is bitter, which I haven't tried, so I have no way of knowing. Dogbane is often bitter, but for some reason in the soil or whatever, in this instance, this common Dogbane is not. Someone just saw milky latex coming out of common milkweed, thought, oh, I eat dandelion, that has a milky latex, but not as much. So the milkweed must be really, really bitter. So I have to boil it down really hard. One final thought, I did contact Sam Thayer about this. He loves puzzles like this, so I'm going to be sending him some pictures of the flowers when they come out, the fruits when they come out, and see if, I mean, who knows, maybe we have, he suggested maybe this one has different genetics, so maybe we have a different subspecies or something here. Cool mystery.